Hi there, this is Paul Sargent. Welcome again to AP European History, and we're talking about World War I. In our first episode, we talked about sort of how the war started and what the Western Front was all about. And in this episode, we're going to look at how the war spread to different areas, some of the new technology, and how it affected those people still living at home and turned it into what was called a total war. So really, when you look at the widening of the war, you have other people that jump in who are not necessarily part of the original alliance system. The Ottoman Empire, which had been sort of kept outside of it completely. Italy, who had been in an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary, decided that they hadn't been attacked, and the alliance that they'd put together was a defensive alliance. So ultimately, they were offered better terms by the British, and they jumped in on the side of the Allies. Bulgaria comes into the war, and all of this. And it becomes a global conflict because it stretches out to areas which those main European countries had taken over during the period of imperialism. In the Middle East, which is largely under the control of the Ottoman Empire, Lawrence of Arabia, a British soldier, creates a sense of Arab nationalism and actually unifies a lot of tribes of Arabs into one fighting force that brings them against the Ottoman Turks. There is war that goes on in the African colonies, and of course Africans are affected by that. And the United States joins in, which ultimately becomes sort of a big turning point in the entire thing. It changed the neutrality we had. Now, in European history, you don't need to know a lot about the United States, and maybe until we get into like the Cold War. But just to review from U.S. history classes you may have had, obviously when the Lusitania sank, and there were American people on board, we got very upset. So we said to the Germans, hey, you can't go sinking ships just because you want to sink ships. And the Germans stopped doing that. Their U-boats were basically ineffective if they can't use them to sink ships. And then finally, in January of 1917, the Kaiser decides that they're in a position that they can now call for unrestricted submarine warfare. That means they're going to sink anything in the ocean. And the United States, being a neutral power and trying to fight for neutrality, we say, well, we can't deal with that, so we're at war, and we come in. And what you see is technology then changes the war as it goes along. This is the first real big technological war. Airplanes make their debut, having only been invented a few years before by the Wright brothers, but they make their debut. Machine guns that Europeans had while they were conquering Africa and the natives didn't. Well, these are Europeans fighting Europeans, and everybody's got them. And machine guns do some horrible things when it comes to guys going across no man's land. Zeppelins, which are sort of large inflatable dirigibles, if that means anything to you, large inflatable flying ships, I guess, is a good way to describe them. If you don't know what they are, look for a picture of a Zeppelin and you'll, okay, I see. But they're used mainly for reconnaissance, to look at enemy trenches and things like that. And late in the war, tanks make their debut, although no one really knows how to use them. They have a limited effect. It is nice because you can drive a tank right across no man's land, right over the barbed wire, and right across a trench if you need to, because they're very good for that. And machine guns aren't very good against tanks. But machine guns really change the war because it increases the amount of death and destruction. People get absolutely mowed down as they run across no man's land to try and take the trench by the hundreds. Now these scenes of trench warfare have been memorialized in movies. People here getting ready to take on a trench. A lot of the life in the trenches is not pretty stuff. There's death, there's disease, it's not fun, but there's also a lot of just boredom and downtime and all of that. And of course, later in the war, when poison gas becomes part of the reality, then gas masks are created to kind of fight against that. So how does this all affect the people at home? Well, World War I is generally considered to be the first example of a total war. And in a total war, the entire country is pulled together for the war effort. Typically, you see political centralization, so there's more power inside of the government, and economic regimentation, which means that the economy is actually regulated by the government in lots and lots of different ways. You see conscription coming up. Rather than having volunteer armies, now you're drafting guys into warfare. Economics changes largely because the government has to take over some industries. They have to tell industries what to produce and what not to produce. Sometimes they have to ration goods going to people. Sometimes they have to set price limits because when there's not enough stuff out there, people can charge whatever they want to for the stuff they have. So sometimes they even go so far as to nationalize industries and basically take over the industries from individuals and turn them into countrywide industries. Well, all of this is really like some countries do it well, some countries don't do it well in turning to total war. Germany does pretty well for a while at least. Britain and France are not used to having this kind of control in their countries. And so for them, it becomes more difficult because it changes the way their people are used to doing things. And Britain, which has been largely liberal at this point for, well over 100 years, is now starting to impose some controls that people don't like. There's really limited success in Russia, Austria, Hungary, and Italy over in Eastern Europe because they're not able to effectively regulate the economy and get those things going. But the war spreads out all across the world, and colonial powers get resources and troops from their colonies. So here we see some French African troops lining up and getting together. Wartime leaders have an increased role here in terms of what to do in order to keep the war effort going. And that all has an effect on the public order and public opinion. Like, what do you do if you're trying to fight a war and then you have people who are protesting that war or striking against that war, or something like that? How do you deal with unrest, basically? Lots of trade unions go on strikes. Some people are calling for socialist revolutions. In Russia, they have a complete revolution. And of course, then you just have the people who are opposed to war itself. Liberals who say that it's just kind of the traditional elites fighting against one another, and the normal people get thrown in the way of machine guns, and socialists who say this is all driven by capitalists wanting to make money, and if we were all socialist, then we wouldn't have to fight wars like this. And so you deal with that, or at least they dealt with that at the time, by expanding the police powers of the state. The Defense of the Realm, I should say, Act in Britain kind of gave the police more power in terms of arresting people who are political dissidents and all of that. And you can counteract it with propaganda, giving people reasons to fight. Generally, it drops into two categories, positive and negative. Positive is like, hey, here are reasons why you should be a part of this war effort. And negative is the enemy is the devil and we should fight them. And we see lots and lots of that. Okay, here's a good example here. Your country's call. Isn't this worth fighting for? Enlist now. This is sort of the positive propaganda thing. Fight for your country. And then, there's negative stuff with German soldiers bayoneting babies in Berlin type of thing. There's also some social impacts that happen with total war. Labor gets benefit because there's no unemployment. Everybody gets employed during the war. And trade unions have to be recognized as part of this. So they gain the power to be able to eventually bargain collectively and work as a real modern trade union. Women see some benefits. They demand equal pay in a lot of places. They don't get it, but they do get better pay because they're needed for the war effort. Of course, when the boys come home from war, most of the women are sent back home and the men get the job. This does, though, impact kind of their movement because women do get the vote in most places. So you can say that war kind of leveled the playing field socially, and in some places it made social hierarchy different. So anyway, that's a little bit about total war and about technology. Next time we're going to take a look at the Russian Revolution. I hope you're enjoying these. Again, my name's Paul Sargent. Thanks for watching.